So if you go to the shelf, there's probably like 20 sharks underneath your flasher while you're doing blue water drift.
This is the Stalk Outdoors podcast. I'm Andy. Join me as I sit down with spearos, bow hunters, fishing fanatics and adventure lovers from around the world, sharing their tips, tricks and stories as they choose to live a life down the path less travelled. Well, welcome back to the podcast. I'm pretty excited today. I'm sitting down with a young spearo called Zach Schmidt. He's a cracking young spearo from North Queensland, and he has some of the best underwater footage that you'll ever see. Zach Schmidt, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me today. I'm pretty excited to just have a chat about spearfishing and all that sort of stuff. First podcast I've ever been on, so definitely be interesting to see how
it all rolls out, mate.
Goes. Yeah.
Mate, how good. It's great to have you on, mate. I really appreciate you coming on and giving me your time. First things first, so, mate, you're a bit knocked up. What's going on? You've had your teeth pulled or something?
Yeah, so last week had to get all 4 wisdom teeth pulled out, so that was not the best experience ever. Did it in the chair as well, so I didn't go under.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, experienced the whole thing awake, and luckily didn't end up too bad actually. Didn't get any swelling, didn't have to put stitches in, so pretty much nearly healed up. Probably a week or 2 out of the water, and then I'll be sweet to go.
I was about to say that'd put you out of the water for a little bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I just missed. We just had pretty much a whole week of 0 knots, and I missed the whole week of diving.
Oh fuck, that is shit.
Yeah. And now we're back to 30 knot winds just as I'm about to probably be good to dive again.
Oh, so. Mate. Oh, it's the way it is, isn't it, at the moment? Whereabouts are you based out of, mate?
So I'm in Townsville. So I moved there 3 years ago to study at James Cook University, doing Bachelor of Marine Biology. And I'm actually in my last year now. So I'm nearly finished up and not too sure where I'm going to go with it at the moment. But yeah. Once I get there, I guess that'll be when I figure it out.
Obviously a clear water direction in your life, mate.
Yeah, definitely something to do with the ocean. I'm going to be continuing to do all the videos and all that sort of stuff. If I can make it something that's full time, then that's the dream that I'm after. But yeah, definitely something to do with the ocean. I grew up in Bali as well, so surfing was a big part of what I did growing up.
Yeah, right. Mate, I was going through your Instagram page and I was looking and I saw that whale shark footage that you guys captured recently, mate. Talk to us a bit about that. What an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't had the pleasure to dive with a whale shark before, but mate, how incredible. Is that something you guys have often down that way or?
So that was actually the first time we ever saw one. So I've seen 2 since then, but It took about 2.5 years of diving before I saw my first one ever. And it was just really random. I was on the edge of the reef. I swam out about 20 meters looking for like jobfish and Spanish mackerel. And it just swam right up to me. And I was like, oh my God. And he stayed around for like 20, 30 minutes. So we had like a very long swim with him. He was really chill, cruised around. He actually came up to the boat to check out the boat 2 or 3 times as well. So honestly, very lucky because a lot of the time they are pretty curious creatures, but I haven't heard of one that stays around for nearly 45 minutes with 3 divers in the water. So that was pretty special and got some really good footage. Luckily,
mate, it looked incredible. Like what an experience! I think even if for someone who isn't into spearing, or that is something that that's on the bucket list items in your life, isn't it? Like what an amazing experience,
100%.
Man.
Definitely one of the most amazing sea creatures you could, see and experience in the water. They're so big as well. Like when I first saw it, I couldn't believe like the actual size, and you don't really think about it when you don't actually get to see them. You don't really realize how big they are once you see it in person.
Yeah, right.
And makes you feel tiny.
Wow. And mate, I think you were saying that he was quite a young one. Is that right?
Yep. So that might have been because there's been 2 instances we've seen them. So the small one was a more recent one that we saw.
Yeah.
And that was actually like a real baby. So I think it was only 4 or 5 meters long at most. So it honestly looked like, the bull sharks that you get that are 3.5 meters that swim around. It was only a little bit bigger than them.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. He was a bit more, he sort of just swam off after like 2 minutes. We didn't get very long to swim with him. But
Yep.
the other one, the first one, that was when we had like a long 30-minute dive.
So how big do you reckon that the first one was? You know, you were saying he was a lot bigger than that small one. Like, how big are we talking?
Probably between 8 and 12 meters. I don't
Jesus.
want to say that I'm pushing. Maybe it wasn't pushing 10 meters. It's really hard to sort of tell because like they're so much bigger than you. So you want to think that it could be like 20 meters, but probably realistically, I think 8 to 10 meters long is what it would have been like.
Man, that is
It was definitely
incredible.
twice the size of the boat. So yeah.
Wow. That's so, yeah, I just can't even believe it. That would be one of my ultimate things to experience under the water. Even like, you know, interactions with turtles and stuff that you have as a Spiro, everyone who dives is like, yeah, you have these interactions, but yeah, to see a creature like that up close and for 45 minutes, wow, man, that's incredible, brother.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that makes spearfishing so special is that you never know when stuff like that's going to swim in. You get to see so many amazing things that if I was just fishing on the boat, I think I'd miss out on. So that's why I decided that jumping in the water and doing the whole diving thing was definitely what I was more keen on doing.
Yeah, and I think for people that don't dive themselves, they probably don't see that side of things. I sort of equate it to like it's almost like a trip to another, or like the moon or something like that. You could literally, it's like another world, isn't it? Like that you just can't experience from being on top of the surface.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes like the spots that we find diving, if you were just fishing that spot, you know, you on the boat for sure, you'd be like, oh, there's heaps of fish down there. You're pulling fish after fish, but unless you actually jump in the water and see what's happening, like you don't get to experience what's really down there. And when you dive, it's just like, oh my god, like you know, you get these pinnacles that just hold insane fish life, and you get to see all of it sort of go down rather than just sitting on the boat and hooking them all up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, both have their fun, but like you said, for me personally, after I've been out for a day of diving, I just feel so good, like mentally and physically. You're obviously pretty tired, but just experiencing, like you said, all those fish and the reef life and all that's going on down there, it does feel like you're in another world.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what a place! I love it. Love my diving, mate. Let's get to know you a little bit, buddy. So you mentioned you grew up in Bali. Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah.
And are your parents Balinese, mate, or what? Like, were you born in Bali, or how did that sort of play out?
So I was born in Melbourne, and 2 weeks after I was born, I ended up moving straight to Bali. Mum's Australian, dad's German, and pretty much they met 10 years beforehand in Bali, decided they wanted to live there, and so I grew up the first 16 years just living pretty much in Bali most of my life. Went to a Australian international school, and in year 10 or year 9, I moved to Melbourne to finish my education at a boarding house. And then that sort of just ended up me being here in Queensland doing the marine biology studies. So
Yeah, nice. Mate, what was life like growing up in Bali as a young kid? Like, you would have obviously spent a shitload of time in the water.
yeah, lots of time in the water. Very different lifestyle to the kind that I have here now in Australia. Most mornings you wake up before school, go for a surf. After school, first thing you do is go straight in the water to go for another surf.
Yeah, wow.
If you're not surfing, then you're doing all sorts of other stuff. There's so many activities that you can do, and having the ocean pretty much all around you. Yeah.
Mate, was your parents into surfing and the water lifestyle, or was it just something that you got into from having mates that you like lived around that were into it as well, or was that just sort of the done thing from all young kids over in Bali?
So they weren't super keen on surfing and stuff, but they definitely loved the ocean. They did a lot of scuba diving, but in terms of surfing, I got into it from all my mates. A lot of families there move, you know, for the surfing, so their kids end up, you know, guns at surfing and stuff. A lot of them end up doing comps and that sort of thing. I was never one of those kids, but I definitely love to jump in and just, you know, have fun surfing and that. And so they all got me into it from there.
Yeah, right, mate. Any spearing over there as a young fella, or was that not something like? Is there much fish life over there, or is it not so much like over here?
So that's actually the interesting thing is while I was living there, I actually didn't spearfish at all. It wasn't something that ever really came up as an interest, or like no one really that I knew actually spearfished at all there. There are a few people that do it. I think in terms of fish life, it's definitely not as good as here on the Great Barrier Reef. We have a lot more diversity and a lot more restrictions that, help keep populations pretty healthy.
Yeah.
So from what I've heard from friends that now go spearfishing in Bali, because as soon as I started the spearfishing here, it sort of seemed like everyone that was in Bali was like, oh, like let's jump into spearfishing. So that sort of opened up that window for everyone.
Yeah.
And they get a couple good fish there, but I think they have to work quite a lot harder versus what we have to do here. I mean, a lot of the fish in the Great Barrier Reef can be pretty easy to shoot just because there's so many of them. But yeah, I didn't spearfish in Bali at all. So I'm definitely keen the next time I go back to jump in the water and see what it's like to just compare.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few people like shooting doggies and stuff over there, maybe a little bit more of the pelagic type of stuff that's sort of kicking around in some of those areas.
Pelagics are definitely better to catch over there just because you've got all the continental shelves and deep water contours. But in terms of actual reef demersal fish, I think it's pretty hard to actually get one that's like over 50 centimeters.
Yeah, a little bit fished out maybe.
Yeah, but with pelagics, they move in and out, so it's not really as pressured in that way. But
yeah, right, mate. So you mentioned that you moved, was it 3 years ago you moved to study at James Cook Uni there for your marine biology stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And is this your last year? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so I've got 2 subjects left, doing one now and then an intensive in July. And then have to decide whether or not I go into further studies and do a master's or just jump straight into working and seeing what I can get myself into.
Yeah, nice. And mate, what about, so on the spearing front there, mate, like you got into it 3 years ago when you moved over, like you hadn't really done a whole lot by the sounds of it. Did you have some early mentors or like who sort of, what was the process of getting you involved in spearing?
So I started on campus at JCU, and a mate that I met in the first week, he was super keen spearer from Sydney. He'd moved up pretty much to spear the Great Barrier Reef and get in the water and do that stuff. And since I realized there was no surfing in Queensland, I was like, oh, well, this sounds pretty fun. And he got me straight into it. I got the full kit out, and first trip I went out to the reef, I was sold. I was like, yep, this is really good fun. I'm definitely wanting to continue doing this while I'm here. And so that jumped me into the whole video stuff. And now I'm just trying to make it as much of my life as I can.
Yeah, right. And then, so like early barriers for you, mate, as a new Spiro, like access to boats, things like that. Was that an issue for you when you were kicking off initially, or like how did that sort of work?
Yeah, it can definitely be pretty difficult to get invites on boats and stuff, especially when you're new. Once you get pretty good at spearfishing, people are more likely to take you out because they know you can, know what to do, drive the boat, actually shoot fish and stuff. So it is definitely a barrier at the start to actually jump in the water and get to experience spearfishing for the first time. I was lucky that my whole family ended up moving to Queensland during the COVID pandemic. Right. So when they moved to Queensland, we decided to get a boat, and that sort of opened up that opportunity for me. If it wasn't for that, it definitely would have been really difficult to actually get out there and do a lot of diving on the reef. There's always Maggie Island, but we get pretty bad visibility most days.
Yeah.
It's never really more than 2 meters.
Yeah, and I guess up in North Queensland here, it is a little bit sketchy, I guess, with headland diving and stuff like that. Obviously down south, New South Wales, even down south of Queensland, of course, probably a little bit safer and a bit easier for people like that don't have access to a boat to, at least be able to do some headland diving and chase some Spanish or some Jewfish or whatever. But obviously, North Queensland, from my perspective anyway, I don't really tend to do too much headland diving. Maybe in the winter months a little bit where it's a bit less crocky.
Yeah, that's for sure. I have done a little bit in winter, but it'll only be for like 30 minutes and then I'll jump out of the water. It's a bit, even though the crocs are definitely not as active in winter, it's pretty spooky to be in the water thinking they could be around. And I mean, the main restrictor for that as well is just that we never get clean water out around Townsville. So if we're lucky, like 2 meter visibility off the headlands is insanely clear. Like it'll never be cleaner than that, or at least I've never seen it that clean or cleaner than that. So at Maggie Island, though, you can catch the ferry over and do shore dives from there, which is good.
Yeah.
I think that's like the best opportunity for people in Townsville to get into spearfishing is just to head over to Maggie and do some diving there. Can get up to 10 meter viz. It's just a matter of timing it, really.
Yeah, right. So, mate, being based out of Townsville, you've got a fair steam out to the reef. For people that aren't sort of 100% familiar with the reef systems and stuff around Townsville, like what's an average trip out to a decent sort of a reef in distance-wise for you guys?
So the first reefs that we've got off here are 72 kilometers away, I'm pretty sure, or they might be around 70 kilometers. So it's a really long punch. In my boat, takes us around 2.5 hours, and that's if it's flat. We're going like 20 knots the whole way. And if you want to go a bit further, you've got reefs around 90 kilometers offshore, and then all the way up to about 140 kilometers offshore is like the last bit of reef. And the thing is, like, I found even the first reefs at 70 kilometers out, they're really, really healthy. I think just because people struggle to get all the way out there, they don't get pressured as much.
Yeah.
So honestly, all the reefs are really healthy out here, and you can pretty much get all your species on any of them. We'll generally go to a reef called Keeper Reef. So it's actually one of the closest ones off Townsville. That's the first reef I ever went to. And pretty much a reef I go back to constantly just because I know there's great fish. And a lot of people overlook it thinking that they got to go a bit further out to get better fish, but there's definitely good fish there.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've heard of many people, oh, we won't go here, it's too close, it'll be heavily fished. And I think that's the thing, like a lot of those places are overlooked, and if you spend a little bit of time having a look around, you might be a bit surprised as to actually what is kicking around those closer sort of reefs, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. Because if 9 out of 10 people are pushing further to go to somewhere where they think is going to be better, then if you're the 1 out of 10 that stays at Keeper Reef and checks it out, you're gonna probably find just as good fish as they will.
Yeah, we're a bit lucky. I'm just based a little bit south of Port Douglas, so I guess probably 20 to 50 Ks up to 80 Ks, like 80 to 90 kilometres. That's a fairly big day for us. But yeah, around that 50 kilometre mark, we got some like sort of north of Port Douglas and a few other areas there. We seem to get onto some nice fish. The visibility doesn't seem to be as good up here. Like some of those videos that you're shooting, mate, the visibility is just insane.
Yes, that's the good thing about having reefs that are so far offshore is that we've got such a vast area of space for water to clean itself up. I think with the Port Douglas reefs, because you guys have them really close, all that runoff probably gets stuck around the reefs and it doesn't get cleaned up as easily. Because I've had a look at the Port Douglas reefs before, and I'm pretty keen on actually going up there. I've seen that your like continental shelf is a lot closer than what ours is, because we got to punch at least 110 kilometers to get to the shelf off here, which is not always doable in my boat. It's got to be absolutely glassed out for me to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I'd definitely be keen on doing some trips up there.
Yeah, we'll have to get you up one time and show you some of those areas actually. But yeah, the shelf is a little bit closer. Obviously, it's a fairly advanced sort of diving out in that shelf there. She gets pretty hairy, but yeah, I do know a few blokes that head out there and smack some doggies and stuff like that and have a pretty good success out there. But yeah, it's pretty sharky out that sort of way. But again, depends on your level of diving, I guess.
Yeah, I think the sharks are all along the Great Barrier Reef. I haven't heard of people that go out and have no troubles. Like we do have the odd trip where we won't see a single shark. Could be because of tides and stuff like that. But even off Townsville, if you go to the shelf, there's probably like 20 sharks underneath your flasher while you're doing blue water drifts. So every time you shoot a doggy, you've got to get them up really quick so you don't lose them. Yeah,
super tough fish to land. I haven't actually been out doggy hunting, but obviously super rare to even get them up past the sharks, or very hard to. Like you said, you got to have a pretty good team of boys working in the water there to get them up past the sharks, eh?
Yeah, that's for sure. Like on the last trip, we were lucky enough to shoot two. One was landed and the second one unfortunately wasn't. But there was just a lack of communication because one of the boys had just shot one. I just pulled it up quickly. And then as I was midway pulling the first one up, another one got shot. And having 3 boys in the water, I can only focus on one fish at a time. So
yeah, just not enough guys.
Yeah. So ideally for blue water, you want at least 3 people in the water. 4 is good, just because normally you got one guy on the big gun, one guy on a reel gun. As soon as the big gun goes off, it's the reel gun's person's duty to pretty much get that fish landed.
Yeah. Mate, what about your dive crew there? You seem to have a pretty good bunch of lads that you head out with. Is it a regular bunch of blokes? How did you meet them? And yeah, talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so they're all uni students. So all of them are met through classes, and they all were pretty keen on spearfishing. A few of them hadn't actually spearfished before as well, just like myself. After the first time they came out, they were like, "Yep, we're sold. I'm definitely keen to keep doing this with you." So yeah, they're just my best mates. There's about 6 or 8 of us that I regularly go out with, and yeah, we always have a good time. And more recently, we've been getting onto some better fish like red emperor and stuff, figuring out where to find them, which has been really good.
Yeah, that was going to be a discussion point of the day, mate, onto the reds. So I have noticed, I think you might have shot, was it a 9 kilo red you shot in 12 meters water recently?
Yeah, so we've actually shot 2 now. Well, one was 8.7 kilos, and then the other one was 9 kilos.
Wow.
So, and oddly enough, it was on the exact same bommy on 2 different trips.
Right.
So a bit of a honey hole, we're hoping.
Most definitely.
But yeah, so just looking for isolated rocks and lagoons of reef between that 12-meter sort of range, and you definitely find red emperor pretty consistently, even mangrove jacks and big tusk fish as well. And that was a pretty funny one because we jumped in on it on the last dive of the day, and this was when we went to the shelf, got a few doggies and stuff. And I just said to my mate, we'll just have a look. And after 2 minutes of being on the bommy, this 9 kilo red cruises in, and we just tell him to go straight down and shoot it. And it was his first red emperor ever. So
wow.
9 kilo red.
9 kilos straight up.
Yeah. 81
Jeez.
centimeters. It was
what a fish.
Definitely a dream fish for him.
Wow. Mate, I think around that 6 to 7 kilos, my PB, I think. But still.
That's still a really good fish, though.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that one bent my spear, actually, a Rob Allen spear. It was a lot heavier on the spear and super powerful than what I anticipated, probably. A lot like a tusky, I suppose.
Yeah, they've got heaps of go in them. We were lucky, actually. Both the 2 big ones that we've shot have been stone shots, so
right.
They didn't have any fight in them, because when he pulled that shot on that one, the spear only went halfway through and hit it in the brain. As soon as he tugged it, the spear came straight out and it just sort of sunk.
Wow.
So one of us had to go down and quickly shoot it.
And that, you landed it, yeah? Still landed it?
We did land it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. Mate, so for someone that's looking to target reds, you sort of spoke about before, what are they looking for, mate, for you, from your perspective? You said like isolated bommies and stuff. You mean like a fairly big size bommy, or like what are you sort of talking there?
So from what I found, smaller is better. If you've got, most reefs do have a lagoon sort of area, so you sort of see where the reef meets the sand, and then you've got little isolated pinnacles around that 10 to 15 meter mark that sort of scatter around. All you want to do is pretty much hop each one, sort of figuring out which ones are the good ones. You'll come across ones which are, really dead, haven't got any fish life on them, and then the one right next to it could be completely lit up with all sorts of red emperor, mangrove jacks and stuff. So,
yep.
But smaller is better. I found less than 10 meters squared is probably an ideal sort of size rock. They really like it when there's lots of sand around. So having like the next bommy at least 50 meters away, so there's nothing really around for them to go to. So they all sort of congregate on the same spot.
Right.
But as well, from what I found, it's pretty, like, it's hard to say it's consistent, because we've been to spots where on one trip we've had 4 red emperor, 4 mangrove jacks, 8 tuskies all on one spot, and then we've come back a next trip and there's been absolutely nothing there. So they move around a lot.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is just check as many different bommies as you can in that 10 to 15 meter range.
Yeah, I think that's the key, just bouncing around, covering as much ground as possible. I mean, I'm not sure. I'll probably hit on that with you, but I may as well ask it now. Do you guys? What's your boat technique? Do you have a boatie in the water all the times rather than anchoring so you can drift around? Like, how do you guys roll?
Yeah, so we always do 4 people on the boat, 3 people in, 1 person being boatie. And when we're doing the bommy hopping stuff, I'll just drop 3 boys on 3 different bommies, depending on how confident the people you're diving with are. Obviously, if you're not super confident, keep 2 people together. Don't separate people. It's always better to have a dive buddy nearby. And so we'll either normally the bombies are very close to each other. By close, 50 meters is 20 to 50 meters between each one. So they're not completely miles away from each other. And then whoever's boatie gets to swap with the last person, and we sort of just go through a rotation of 1 in, 1 out. And then by the time you've dived 3 different bombies, you're pretty wrecked anyway. So you're pretty happy to jump in the boat and
have a bit of a
chill
spell
for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found for us
so,
personally, the same thing is having, we have like a float line set up on the back of I guess you could call it a tow line set up with some little floats on the back with some little handholds. So rather than everyone getting in and out of the boat and taking their weight belts off and sort of getting frustrated with wasting a lot of time, we've found that just towing around to the next set of bombies, if they're in, if you're in an area where there's, within a couple hundred meters, just towing the boys around that sort of 6 knots or 6 kilometers an hour. And then you just cover a whole lot more ground rather than wasting the day sort of sitting off one rock or, trying to swim against the current to different rocks, and the limited success in that method, really, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the more efficient you can be checking the bombies, the more likely you're going to find a red, because sometimes it takes 20 to 30 different dives on different spots until you actually find one. And then all of a sudden the next 6 have 6 reds on it. So you can't time it. It's all just a matter of luck, really. So yeah, the more you can cover in a short amount of time, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
But it can be pretty full on. Like some of the boys that come out, they don't really enjoy that kind of diving because it's like nonstop. Boys jump in, jump out, jump in. And it can be pretty intense if you're not super keen on diving. You just want to have like a relaxed time on the reef.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? I guess for people who aren't, like you said, that super experienced diver or right into it or have a reasonable level of in-water fitness, it's a pretty big day out there, isn't it? Like generally, well, it depends who we can get available. I've got a pretty solid crew of about 4 or 5 guys that we generally dive together. And, we might leave home at 3 a.m. and get home at 8 p.m. and we would have dived for the best part of 10 hours. So, it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, it's a long day. By the end of it, you're pretty knackered. We often sleep out on the reef. We do 2 days at a time, just because with uni and stuff, it's a lot cheaper to stay out there rather than drive all the way back in and then send it out again the second day. So we sleep pretty rough on the boat, 4 boys on a 5.5 meter tinny. If it's not flat, we definitely don't get much sleep. And then the next day is even tougher because we've just had a whole day of diving the day before. But we're all super keen. So as long as we're in the water, we're happy.
What do they say? Do the miles, get the smiles.
Yep, that's it. And it definitely beats being in class at uni. So
100%.
Any day we can take off is definitely a day worth spent.
Oh, that's right. A shit day on the reef is better than a good day at work, right?
100%.
Mate, you mentioned your boat there. What do you got? What are you running with?
So it's a 5.5 meter CJ Trojan. So it's the Cuddy cabin model. And I've got a 150 Honda on the back.
And I saw you were having a bit of engine trouble lately. What was the go there?
Yeah, so we weren't really too sure because we had it checked twice and they couldn't quite find what was the problem, but something to do with the fuel. I think the fuel injector regulator wasn't sending the right signal, so it was sending out too much petrol and it was just sort of flooding it. When we wanted to start the engine, it wasn't turning over properly, and even at high revs, it felt like it was just trying to push down. Didn't feel like it was going at full speed.
Yeah, right.
It does seem to be fixed now, but I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one because it feels like the engine's not as strong as it used to be in terms of like the speed it can pick up to. but it might just all be in my head. So
you get paranoid, don't you? When
hard.
things start going wrong with your motor and
Yeah.
you're a long way out, your mind starts playing a few tricks on you.
Yeah, that's it. Like now I pick up on noises that in the past I would have never even thought about. If the engine makes a weird sound, I'm like, oh,
What was that?
Is it going to turn back on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I leave mine
we
on.
got
I
stuck
leave
on
mine
the
on, man.
shelf.
I leave mine on. I just pretty much,
Yeah.
we just leave it running. I don't turn it off.
Yeah, that's probably the safer way to go.
Yeah. I mean, it
Yeah,
might cost you a bit more in petrol or whatever. It uses bugger all. I've got like a 5.8 Boston Whaler center console with a 150 Yamaha on it, and to be honest, it's pretty fuel efficient. If you just leave it running all day, I just get too paranoid to turn it off. Really.
Yeah, well, when you're only in idle, I don't think it really eats much petrol. It's more the hours that you pick up, I think.
Yeah.
Because it does add to your engine hours when it sits, which is the main reason I'd tell the boys to switch it off.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're definitely better off keeping it on, though. But yeah, when that engine turned off the first time, we were actually on the shelf spearfishing for doggies. And it was about midday when the engine stopped turning on, and I freaked out for a few moments. I was like, "Oh my god, we're far offshore," and there was no one else out there because it was like a Thursday, Friday, so we were the only ones there. And luckily, we figured it out. Like it just had to do with the primer. I'm not sure it just wasn't getting the petrol, but if we primed it each time before flicking the switch on, it did get started and it got us all the way home, which was lucky.
Yeah, lucky. Mate, bringing it back onto the Reds. Early mornings, afternoons, different tides, the pressure edge of the bombies. Is that what you like? What talk a little bit about that?
So what I've found is early morning, late afternoon is probably the best chance of shooting them. I don't actually know if there's any correlation between them or if it's just a matter of luck, but both of the 8.79 kilo reds that we shot were after 5 p.m. And that trip that we found the bommy with 4 reds, 4 jacks, and just heaps of fish life, that was around 6:15. So the sun was just on its way out, and it's hard to say whether or not it was because the sun was going down that everything just sort of came out. I think there's definitely some correlation there. So from what I've found, the last 2 hours of sunlight is probably your best chance of shooting a red, whether or not they're more active, so they're swimming around checking bombies. But during the middle of the day, we rarely have much luck. It's pretty quiet normally.
That could be tide dependent as well, do you think?
Yeah, definitely a little bit to do with the tides. I haven't personally focused on checking what the tides have been doing when we shot them. But I guess generally it's around a mid-tide from what I probably last saw. I think it was an incoming tide when we shot the last one. But since you're only in 10 to 15 meters of water, you don't really feel much of the current where you are because you're inside the back of the reef. So
yeah, okay.
A lot of it's rushing on the front side, not where you're generally spearing in.
Yeah, so they talk about the pressure edge of the reef, obviously being good for circulation of bait and congregation of bait, stuff like that. Have you found with your diving, you guys tried it? Like, if you're doing a drift, you might start up current and then drift onto the pressure edge. Is that a thing for you guys, or you haven't really looked that far into it?
Yeah, so if we're diving blue water and going for doggies, Spanish, anything that's pelagic, generally, well, depending if we're on the shelf or at the reef, we'll start about 100 meters in front of where the reef actually comes up to the shallow part. You do your drift, start your chumming, and by the time you've pretty much reached that 30 to 20 meter contour is when all your burley sort of reaching the bottom. And that's when pretty much everything sort of lights up. There's all the bait pressed up against the reef, and that's when you're most likely going to shoot those fish.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely do that when we're going blue water. In terms of demersal fish, it does help. Like if you are on a reef that is relatively healthy and you're on the pressure edge where the current's pushing, definitely a lot of things will move to that area. But it depends what species you're after. If you're after red emperor, I don't think it really will help. You don't really find that many reds on the outside of the reef, or at least we haven't.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're there, but probably just a lot harder to find.
Yeah, and you mentioned that sometimes you've had a really good little honey hole, you think it's going to deliver, and next time you come back, it's quite empty. So I think a lot of people maybe feel or think that say a red emperor or a jack, whatever, will live on that one rock the whole time, but it's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be the case because we've gone back to the same spot multiple times, and even spots that have been absolutely rubbish one trip will produce the best fish of the day on another trip. So it's definitely worth figuring out though which bommies are better than others. Normally, the ones that have got big caves, you can sort of tell which ones are going to hold mangrove jack. You definitely keep those on your marks, and then you just go back to them each time, check if a new mangrove jack's moved in. They're pretty, like, the fish definitely move around a lot, because on the last trip we shot like a 70 centimeter jack off a bommy. There was nothing there the next trip, and then another week later we went back and two more jacks moved in. So
Yeah, right.
it's pretty consistent. And even the bommy where we shot the two big reds on, there was only like a month difference between shooting the reds off there, and there's been 4 out of 5 trips where a red's been on that bommy.
Yeah, okay.
So, and every time it's a new one, because last time it wasn't there. So,
And do you find with the reds,
yeah.
mate, they're like you said before, they're kicking around on the sort of on the outskirts of that bommy around the sand areas rather than being sort of holed up like a jack?
Yeah, so they're always on the sand very often. And that's the other thing. If you find a bommy and you don't think it looks good from the surface, definitely just dive down and check it out. Most of the time, we get to the bottom, you just do a bit of grunting, dust up, just make a bit of commotion. Very often, like your sweet lips, the every bommy has a big school of sweet lips normally. If you can just get them interested, normally they bring in reds and stuff like that. So the reds always come in from the sand. They've never really been on the bommy from the start. So yeah, it's definitely worth just checking each one and just making a bit of commotion.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about hunting technique for the reds there. What are you trying to do there? Sitting on the bottom, you mentioned throwing up some sand. Is that the rough sort of technique you're using for them? Or how much of a factor do you think that sort of plays? Or are they pretty inquisitive and a fairly easy sort of fish to shoot, you reckon?
So they're very inquisitive and very easy to shoot if they're there. It's just a matter of actually getting them to come to where you are, or if they're already on the bommy, then it makes it easy. But from what I've found is if you get to the bottom, you just want to make as much noise as you can. Just start banging your spear gun with your hand and just try to play with your rubbers or whatever. Any noise that you make will pretty much bring any red emperor that's within, who knows, like I'm not too sure how far away they would hear it from, but any red that's probably within a 100-meter area of where you are will come straight towards that noise, because they're very aggressive, dominant fish. So as soon as you get their attention, they'll come in and it'll be an easy shot.
Yeah, nice. Mate, with your filming and stuff like that, obviously that's going to be taking up a bit of time when you're diving. Like, how do you find? I find it a little bit hard to film and dive or do both. You're running a head cam GoPros there. Do you find that gets in the way a little bit of your spearing, or do you sometimes, if you've got a couple of good fish in the boat, will you spend some time filming, or how does that sort of roll out for you guys?
So I've always got a GoPro on pretty much every single dive. I've got the like the Ocean Hunter GP2 mask. Works pretty good actually. Holding the GoPro. I know some people have troubles with the pressure in between your eyes and stuff, but I found that mask is pretty good versus wearing like the head strap mount. I don't really like that, but generally I'll just record all throughout the day, because you never know when something's going to come in. Like when that whale shark swam in, I didn't know that was going to happen. And I would have regretted not having the GoPro on if I came across something like that again. So I just keep the GoPro on at all times, ready to record. And if we've shot a couple good fish, we sort of just chill out, cook up lunch. We enjoy doing like a ceviche, coral trout ceviche on the reef.
So good.
That's our go-to. So
what's your little recipe, mate? What you go to?
So what do we do? Coriander, red onion, avocado, some limes, and then we chuck in some, I can't remember what the last ingredient was. I'm normally not the one who makes it actually, so
yeah.
But it's a good recipe. But so red onion, coriander, and avocado are definitely your top 3.
A bit of orange juice, mate. Try a bit of orange juice as well, believe it or not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I've heard coconut milk as well.
Yeah,
it's been
mate,
people do, but
any of those sort of fresh ingredients, I think, yes, the coral trout ceviche at lunch is definitely one of our favourites out there. It's The
Yeah,
mouth's
you
getting pretty
can't beat it.
salty out there when to put some of that in there. It's
Yeah.
delicious, if a nice little trout swims by and ends up being lunch.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like while we're out there, we often don't eat as much and drink as much as we should because everyone's just super keen to just jump back in the water. It's almost like a you got a paper scissors rock who has to make lunch while the rest of the boys dive.
100%. It's a bit of a battle to get guys to go as Bodie too on my boat.
Yeah, it definitely can be at times, especially the first dive of the day. No one wants to be Bodie for that.
No, I don't know why, maybe because I'm driving out there, getting people out there, but I always seem to go Bodie first, which is, I don't know if that's fair, to be honest.
That's actually the same thing that I do. I don't think pretty much 90% of the trips I'll let everyone jump in first because doing a long 2.5 hour punch out to the reef, I'm pretty tired at that point. So I just need like 10 minutes to, just relax while they all jump in and shoot the first couple fish. But in saying that, every trip we've done to the shelf, every time I've given them the first dive, that's when the doggies or the wahoo get shot. Every single time. It's always the first 2 drifts of the day. And so I've sort of said to myself, next shelf trip, I'm not letting them all dive in the water first. I'm definitely getting first dive as well.
It's heartbreaking
So,
as a Bodie when a wahoo swims past, I imagine.
yeah. Well, that first dive that they did that on that trip that we did for the wahoos, they actually had a school of like 15 swim in. And it was the first 2 drifts that they had. The school came in again and again. And as soon as I jumped in for my drift, they were all gone. So classic.
Oh man, Murphy's Law, mate. Obviously, you guys do a little bit of blue water stuff, and with the wahoo, I haven't had the pleasure of shooting a wahoo. I haven't actually seen one in the water yet. Let's talk a little bit about your blue water stuff, mate. Obviously, target species, the doggies and the wahoo.
Yeah, so doggies and wahoo are definitely at the top there. Jobfish, Spanish mackerel, they're also always welcomed. But in terms of targeting them, I haven't had enough experience to confidently say exactly what you should do, but definitely just that pressure edge where the current's pushing is always your best chance. And with the wahoos especially, if you're not seeing them, it probably could mean that you're too close up to the reef. Yep. When we saw all of ours, it was in 70 meters of water, well and truly at least 500 to nearly a kilometer off the actual reef's edge. So they're really in the pelagic sort of realm, just swimming around, and that's where we find them. Where we found ours, actually, there was a bit of a deep water pinnacle that came up from like 80 meters to around 65 or something, but it was a steep edge. And even though the wahoo were sitting at the top, they obviously knew that that was underneath them because they were on the exact same spot every single drift that we did.
Yeah, right.
And it was right above that.
Yeah, okay, mate. So hunting technique, like obviously using burley and a flasher. What sort of flasher are you guys rolling with there?
Goon bag flasher. So
yep.
If you ever drank a goon bag, you can just cut it up into strips and sort of make up your own. They actually work really well. Otherwise, you can get like your glass panes and that. We always put a squid on the bottom. And if a wahoo, especially, a throw flasher is probably more important than your actual flasher that you drift with. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's just like a little PVC pipe tube, put a bit of reflective tape on it, and then as soon as any of those fish come out, you just throw it 10 meters in front of you, and almost every single time I'll guarantee the wahoo will swim right up to it and try to have a bite at it.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that you're using the little, just a bit of PVC, white PVC with some reflector on it. Is that what you're using for your throw flashes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that.
It doesn't need to be fancy.
Yeah, I got one of the metal. I got like an aluminium sort of throw flasher that I made. It's pretty good. It's got a bit of a spearing rubber on the back of it, and it sort of flicks around, does similar thing. But that little, I did see that. That looked like it was floating really well, like quite nice and slowly. That one that you guys were rolling with there.
Yeah, you don't want it to sink too fast because then half the time you probably can't actually catch up to get it. But yeah, probably honestly the number one piece of equipment that I prioritize on every trip is to make sure that I have that throw flasher. Because even though it works for pelagic fish, there's been multiple times where I'm on the bottom just chasing either a red or mangrove jack, And actually, Maori sea perch that I got last trip, which was my first one, if it wasn't for the throw flasher, I probably wouldn't have got any of those fish. So very important to always have. And if a fish seems to be swimming away, I honestly just pull it straight out and it pretty much turns their head every time.
So holding it in your hand and waving it, or sort of throwing, like if you're under the water, or you just throw it from the surface and then bomb dive down onto it?
So it depends if I've seen the fish first. If I've seen the fish from the surface, I'll let it sink down, and normally fish will come straight in and you can almost just shoot it from above. But if I've already gotten to the bottom and then seen the fish that I want to shoot, I'll just pull. I've got a little pocket on my wetsuit that I pull out of, and yeah, it's pretty good because as soon as you pull that out, they just turn around. And I try to not make too much of a scene as in putting it above my head. I just sort of put it right in front of my face and move it slowly. Sometimes if you almost show them the throw flasher and then hide it, actually gets their attention even more because they just look at it as potentially being a bait fish. So.
Yeah, right. And burley, mate, you mentioned you're putting a burley trail out there. I actually run the same flasher. I think they call it the South African buzzball. I think it might have been a Chris Coates sort of a mock up there. And I found, obviously, it's very successful in bringing fish, but it brings a shitload of sharks in as well. Do you find that really gets them fired up?
Yeah, lots of sharks. We've had multiple grey reefs and stuff actually eat the flasher. Last trip, one of them got stuck on it and it pulled the flasher like 30 meters underwater. And it was lucky because it must have gotten itself untangled and it luckily floated to the surface. But especially the squid that we've got on the bottom, that thing's being ripped up really bad. Like we've had it go into 5 different sharks' mouths and they always have to have a bite on it.
Yeah, so when you say you put that on, you've got the goon bag. How far underneath is the squid? And it's obviously like a rubber fishing type squid or something, is it?
Yeah, just honestly, like any of that stuff that people use for game fishing, all of those work. So that's what I've got at the very bottom. Probably about 2 meters above that, I've got 2 glass panes, and then above that, I've got 3 different sets of the goon bags. So I've just cut it into strips and then tied them together.
Yeah.
And each one, I've got 2 to 3 meters space between each one.
Yeah, right. I've definitely found I've lost a few as well. They just seem to. I end up putting a wire trace on the very bottom of it because the sharks were just snipping it off, and I had to keep buying goon bags.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good thing to do. The only thing is if you put that there and they get properly stuck in it, they'll probably take your whole rig down.
Take me float.
And you won't see it again. So
yeah,
it's a difficult one. But if you're confident with diving and you've done it before, then you know your limits. And especially with burleying up, I won't burley in water that's dirtier than 15 meters.
Yeah.
Generally, I just don't feel like it's worth it, especially with the bull sharks that you get. If you can't see them, it's not fun.
Yeah, and generally the lesser viz, they seem to be a little bit more confident. Have you guys found that? They seem to sort of fire up a little bit on that worse visibility.
Yeah, 100%. Well, they just know that you can't see them, so they just normally sit in just past your vision. And like every time we dive down, our last trip we had, I think 10 meter viz on the shelf. I didn't burley, but we still had the flasher down there. You couldn't see the flasher from the surface, but as soon as you got down 20 meters, you'd just see like 20 sharks circling the flasher and they'd come in and out of the murk. And I was like, nah, I'm done with that. I'm not doing it anymore.
Mate, we touched on the shark front there. Obviously, you guys seem pretty casual around the sharks there, mate, knocking off a few decent cobia off the backs of them and stuff. Shark behavior and stuff, like how does that, when do you guys tend to sort of know to get out of the water? What are you seeing in the shark's behavior when it's reasonably placid versus when you think, fuck, it's time to get out of here?
Yeah, so with bull sharks, they're relatively mellow like the whole time. Like I've only had 2 or 3 instances where they actually come up and check you out. For me, it's when they start coming really close to the surface and get within 2 meters of range of the divers is when I sort of think it's time to get out of the water and move spots. Especially with your grey reef sharks, if they get confident, they're probably more chance of getting bitten by one of them than it is a bull shark, because bull sharks are pretty timid until they actually want to attack you, whereas grey reef sharks are very unpredictable. They'll just sort of one moment they'll be chilling, and then the next moment they're like, oh, like I want to quickly have a go at you, sort of thing. So just knowing when they come closer to you is generally when I know that they're getting a bit fired up. And if they eat a fish as well, that's probably the worst part. When we got that doggy eaten last trip, it was pretty, like, almost instantly all the sharks came straight to the surface for us, because as soon as they finished the doggy off, like, they just wanted more. So
yeah, it puts them into a
that
frenzy,
was
eh?
when we got up moving. Yeah, really, really, really bad frenzy.
Yeah. What about, like, a lot of people talk about, their pectoral fins being sort of down and they're moving very quickly and erratically. That's a bit of a sign to sort of get out. Have you experienced that, or you just sort of, like you said, if they start coming up out of the water column rather than sort of sticking down deeper? Is that, yeah, have you seen any of that sort
Yeah,
of
so
stuff?
if they're moving faster, that's definitely something to look out for, especially with bull sharks. If a bull shark's darting around, that's a pretty good sign that he's pretty fired up and you should get out of the water. When they're on the flasher, normally they're just doing circles of it. And as long as they're doing that and staying down the bottom, I'm not too fast. But it's just as soon as they start darting around a bit faster and they're a bit fired up, that's when I definitely just jump out and move, because they won't leave you alone either. They'll keep following you. And like, if you do the same drift again, but start 100 meters in front, there's a good chance they'll just find you again, because they're pretty aware of, sound and stuff. They can hear you when you jump out of the boat, and they'll just swim straight towards where the flasher is.
Yeah, a bit of classic conditioning there from experience from listening to those sounds equals food, yeah?
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, they're learning that we mean food.
Hmm.
And so it's only a matter of time before they get even more confident, really. And that's the most important thing for people that are just getting into spearfishing is, I know it's obviously a given that you don't want the sharks to eat your fish, but it's probably especially important now to make sure that you're really not giving sharks a chance to eat your fish, because the more and more that we feed them, the more they're going to learn, and someone's going to get bitten eventually because of that. So yeah, I'd probably say that's number one thing that I encourage people to do, is just make sure that you're not taking silly shots when sharks are around. And especially just don't make it easy for them to eat it, and don't muck around as well. Like, I know some people shoot a sweet lip and then they'll just feed the shark the fish, and that's really just not good.
It's
not you. Yeah, and it's not those divers that are going to have the impact of that. Like, they won't get bitten that day, but it'll be a month in from there when the next lot of divers go to that reef and that same shark sees them, is when he's going to be like, oh, last time they gave me food, this time I'm just going to check out what they have to give.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's good wisdom there, mate. Righto, buddy. So on to a little segment we call the Your Yarn. I remember you just spoke about, and I had a look at the video of your Maori sea perch, and there was a bit of a funny story, sort of how you brought it in. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that? It's obviously a memorable fish for you.
Yeah, so one of the hardest fish I've probably ever had to shoot. Took me probably over 30 minutes to get him to come in. But initially, when it first swam in, one of the boys had a perfect shot but didn't feel confident. And as soon as those fish sort of feel like you're hunting them, they'll just swim off and they won't come back. But this one was sort of staying around. Like, he wouldn't come into range, but every single dive, he'd just be behind me, sitting around 5 to 10 meters away. And after multiple dives using the throw flasher, like, I threw it, dusted up the bottom, couldn't get him to come in using any of those methods. And then on the last dive, I just went down to the bottom, and I was actually too buoyant for where I was. I was only in 5 meters of water. So I started floating up, and just out of reaction, I grabbed the first rock next to me, lifted it above my head to keep me on the bottom. And as soon as I did that, the Maori sea perch literally turned his head and was like, oh my God. And he just swam straight into me and gave me the perfect shot. And I have no idea if that's something that will work in the future, but
I'm sure you'll be trying it.
Lifting up the rock was, yeah, I will definitely be doing it for fish that I can't get in again. I think it was a combination of the throw flasher and the rock being in my hand, though. Yeah. It was almost like, when I think back, the throw flasher was hidden behind the rock. So with what I said before, is hiding the flasher after you've actually shown it to them sparks their attention even more, because they want to know where it's gone. And I think he noticed that I sort of hid it behind the rock, but I didn't do it on purpose. It was all just by accident. And then as soon as that happened, he was in as fast as he could come. He was like, oh, quickly head in and check what's going on. So definitely use things like that to your advantage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And is that the first one you said you've shot? Is it? I haven't actually shot one.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the first one I've ever shot. First big one I've ever seen as well. So it was on the shelf, and that's from where I've heard where you generally get your biggest ones. A lot of the time, those 10-kilo fish are in that deeper sort of shelfy water.
Right. So are they a little bit more like a red, not necessarily holed up in a structure, or are they sort of kicking around the sand? Is that, or are they generally inside the structure?
They seem to be up in the reef flats around the structure and stuff. At least from what videos I've seen, they also like to school up with sweet lips. So that's another thing. If you see big schools of sweet lips, and very often you just think, oh, we'll just skip past them. There's actually quite more often than you'd think, either a mangrove jack or a fish like a Maori sea perch hiding in with that school, trying to blend in.
Right.
Especially the mangrove jack. Every time I see a big school of sweet lips, there's normally one somewhere in there, and you just got to pick him out.
It's just hard picking him, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it can be because they all sort of blend their color to look very, very similar. Maori sea perch is pretty easy to pick out, though, because they're bright yellow. They're not as good as blending in with the school, but definitely up in sort of, I think that 5 to 10 meter range is where you get most of them on the shelf. Especially just big rocky reef that's got really good caves in it, is where I found mine, at least.
Yeah, nice. Oh, mate, yeah, cracking little fish, or not so little. What did he end up going? 6 or 7 kilo or something?
I think it was 5.7 kilos. It was 65 centimeters. So
yeah.
It wasn't actually the fattest one that you'd probably find, but I was super stoked that it was over 60 centimeters, because that's a pretty good fish for that species, at least.
Yeah, nice. Mate, onto the kit bag corner. What's in the dive bag, mate? What sort of a gun are you running with?
So at the moment, I'm using a Manny sub, so a 1.1 for the reef, and then an 80 centimeter roller for inshore stuff. And that's been pretty good. Before using that, I'd be running the Rob Allen Tuna Pro. That's probably one of the best guns I've ever used in terms of quality and just versatility of what you can use it for. It's probably the very best. We shot a doggy on that 110 last trip, so it's got heaps of power. And honestly, as a beginner gun, it's probably one of the best ones you could pick out. And actually on the way at the moment, but I'm getting a gun from Spear Blue, which is a custom spear gun manufacturer over in Italy. So they're sending me over their Titan 3, which is a demultiplied inverted roller, which is going to be my primary blue water gun. And so I'm very excited to go out when that comes in, because from what I've heard, it's got like a 8 to 10 meter shooting range, and it's got 6 bands on it. So
yeah, pain in the ass to load, though, I imagine.
Heaps of power. Yeah, that was a funny thing. He actually said to me on the phone when I spoke to him last, he was like, "You better start going to the gym. It's going to be difficult for you to load compared to other guns."
Yeah, right. So, mate, you mentioned you use one. I think your shorter gun's a roller, and is your other guns a conventional, like a 16 mil rubber, or what are you running with?
Yeah. So the Tuna Pro's just got 2 16 mil bands on it. The 1.1 Manny sub is also a roller, though. So that's what I've been recently using the most, just because I was pretty keen on testing out rollers and seeing if they're better or not than conventional. If you're just looking for something really easy and more consistent, I'd go conventional, because rollers seem to be a bit inconsistent. They don't always shoot straight. You get other problems that happen. Sometimes your muzzle line gets tied up, and so
definitely that muzzle wrap. I've sort of dabbled in the rollers, and then I think I had some Rob Allen guns, and I went to some rollers, and then I've come back to the conventional guns, just like you said, that muzzle wrap, and I was finding that my I was having to do a lot more maintenance on the bridles and stuff like that because of that pressure running through the bridles. It's always under pressure and tension. Obviously, it shot pretty nice. I feel like the roller was shooting a little bit higher. I winged I try not to obviously wing fish, but I remember winging some decent fish, and I'm like, oh, I just can't afford to wing any more fish and waste some good fish by. I probably didn't put enough time into it, but I definitely found there was a little bit slightly different shooting, like a different aim point anyway. The way that rollers sort of played out.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, because with my conventional, I'll aim where I want the spear to hit. With the roller, I'll just aim for the middle of the fish, and you honestly just get all sorts of random shots. Like, it's just not as consistent at all in terms of where the spear will go. But in saying that, it's got a lot more power and it seems to glide through the water better. And it might just be my setup that's not being properly tuned for the spear that I've got on there. Yep. It goes to the left a little bit, but yeah, it's a difficult one, but they definitely have their goods and bads.
Yeah, a bit of personal preference. I know a lot of guys love the rollers, a lot of guys don't. I mean, like you said, it's just what you like rolling with. And I believe, speaking to some of the guys, like I think I was chatting with Wayne Judge from Adreno there once, and there was a lot of technique involved in getting that roller to shoot, perfect. And once you do, apparently, it's pretty awesome. But I just didn't put enough time into it, and I was losing too many fish, and I just got a bit impatient and went back to the conventional roll barrel on top carbon sort of guns.
Yeah, well, you've got so many moving parts, so there's a lot more to it, and like your rubbers are a bit more. You got to replace them a bit more often, I feel like, compared to conventional guns.
Yeah.
Just because, like you said, they're under tension all the time. So.
Mate, what about your fins? What are you rolling with there, mate?
Divars. So I've got the Negras. So that's like the step up from the carbon fiber.
Right.
It's like a mix between your composite and your carbon. So it's essentially got the durability as well as the performance. Whereas like your carbon is more performance and then composite's more durability.
Yeah. Definite difference between the carbon and the composite. Do you find longevity throughout the day, less tiredness in the legs, that sort of stuff, or do you notice any difference?
Yeah, so, well, I haven't personally had that much chance to use composites because I've always had the Negra, but from what I've heard, like your composites are just going to last longer and they're like, you're less likely to scratch them up on the reef versus your carbons, but you're not going to get that same performance. So you won't get as much kick out of what you would with the carbon fiber fins. You'll get more, I don't know, it's just easier to kick with from what I've heard. Mm-hmm. And so the Negra, which is just that step up from both, is sort of a combination of the two put together. And I think they're probably, one of the best ones you can get.
Yeah, most definitely. Cracking set of fins. What about a reel versus float line, mate? Obviously for your blue water stuff, are you using a breakaway setup and have you got a reel on your other guns?
Yeah, so for blue water, we've got breakaway set up. We normally got 2 3-atmosphere floats on each gun. And then for the reef, we use reel guns. We used to go with floats quite a lot, but we realized that floats just got in the way, a lot of tangle ups in the reef and stuff. But it is pretty important just for safety because it does make it a lot easier for your boatie to see where you are if you got a float. So that again just depends how long you've been diving for. If you're new to diving, I'd recommend a float over a reel. And then once you're more confident, a reel gun is definitely more convenient because it's a lot easier to just rig up the gun and just get back to spearing. Whereas with the float line, you get a big tangle up and you got to jump back in the boat, untangle it, and then do all that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Really, as a beginner diver, I wouldn't be recommending a reel gun. Guys want to run a reel. I think some people think that maybe their shooting line, it'll increase the distance of them shooting, but obviously that's not the case. And there's risks of entanglement and all sorts of stuff with a reel. So it's probably not something that you'd be looking for as a beginner.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of people do come back because I work at Tackle World Council on weekends and I do a lot of gun rigging and stuff. And a lot of people want to just jump the gun straight to reels, but I always recommend that going the float line is a better option to start with. Because like with the reel gun, if you haven't used them enough, some people accidentally shoot a fish that's too big and then they take their whole gun with it. So
yeah.
Because if you don't tighten up the drag properly and then you sort of lose your breath, it's better off being able to just drop your gun with the float because at least that way you can sort of swim straight up to the surface and not have to hold on to anything.
Yeah, exactly, mate. What about knives? You running 1 or 2? What are you doing there?
So I've got just one dive knife at the moment. It's from Mr. Dive. I can't remember the exact model, but it's a fully titanium knife. So I've actually probably the best one I've had, to be honest. It's non-rust because of the titanium, and it lasted me this long. Like versus all the other dive knives that I've used, I generally go probably like 2 months with each one, and then it either breaks or it falls out of the socket when you're diving and that. But this one that I've used recently is really good. So it's by Mr. Dive. It's like full titanium
Okay.
dive knife. So
I'm notorious for dropping them. I don't know. I feel like I lose one every trip nearly. I do run 2 knives, one on each side of my belt, just for a bit of safety. But man, I'm always dropping the fucking things.
yeah, it's real bad. I think a lot of them aren't designed very well. They could be better, just the sheaths that they're in. So I've just found that one that's actually called the Dive Pro Sea Penetrator. So that's the one from Mr. Dive.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But I've had it for over a year now, and yeah, I think they're pretty good versus all the ones that I've used in the past.
What about wetsuit, mate? What are you running? What the water temp would be 28, 29 up there at the moment?
It's pretty warm at the moment, but I run a 3.5 mil Venture wetsuits. So it's actually a brand in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
They've been really good. So I've been using them the last 3 years. I do get really cold though. So a lot of my mates in this time of year actually just wear Stinger suits. I'm still wearing the 3.5 mil open cell as a top. That's how cold I get.
Mate, people are going to laugh at you
yeah,
from down south. You know that at 28 degrees, you're getting cold wearing a 3 mil.
Yeah. It all sort of came from living in Bali for 16 years because the water's so warm there. It never gets any colder than that, 27 degrees or so. So coming to Queensland, even though it's still warm water, it's in winter, it's freezing for me.
You haven't dived down southern New South Wales or Victoria, obviously, mate.
No, I have not. And when I do, I'm definitely going to need a 5 mil at least.
At least, yeah. Wow. Very good. Mate, what about what sort of mask you're rolling with there, mate? I think you mentioned, was it an Ocean Hunter or something with a GoPro mount?
Yeah, so the Ocean Hunter GP2 Phantom mask, it's just the one that's got the GoPro mount already attached to the mask. So I just prefer that because I feel like I've got more control over where the GoPro is actually facing. Half of the boys, when they use the actual GoPro head strap, half the time I download their footage and it's just looking at the surface or it's looking at the ground.
Yeah.
Because it gets pushed and stuff when you're diving. So at least with mine, like I can readjust it very easily after each dive. So
yeah,
I find that very convenient.
Mate, I used to run a GoPro mask and I just found it ripped my. We do a lot of cray diving and stuff up here, so I found that when I was sticking my head right up in the caves and it actually pulled my mask off a few times and just flooded my mask. Do you ever have that happen to you or not so much?
Yeah, I have had that a few times, and it always happens in the most inconvenient time as well. So that's definitely that's one of the inconvenient parts of it. But I think as long as you can sometimes just push the GoPro back so it doesn't do that. But yeah,
that's all part of it, right?
Yeah.
Righto, buddy. So we're going to move on. We're going to change pace a little bit here, my man.
Righto, folks. It's time for the most important part of this rock show. Your funniest fuck up.
Righto, buddy. I'm sure you guys have fucked some shit up out there. What's the dumbest thing you've done out there? And give us a little story on that note.
Well, yeah, there's a couple different stories, I guess. So, from just doing bad stuff with the anchoring and just management of where you sort of sleep at night. We one time anchored at a reef and I didn't actually check where the wind and swell was going. And overnight it actually did pretty much like a 360 flip on us. And we were anchored on the outside of the reef. So as soon as the anchor came out, we actually drifted around 30 kilometers during the night. And we woke up at a green zone. And so that was like, we woke up and I looked at the sounder and it was like 34 meters deep, whereas we anchored in like 15. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And then I look at the sounder and we're 30 kilometers away from where we were when we anchored. And yeah, in a green zone as well, which is just like,
oh God,
I couldn't
full of
believe
fish
it.
on board, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the thing. I was like, oh my God, like we got to get out of here straight away. Luckily, it was before the sun came up, so we got up at like 5 a.m. because one of the boys noticed that the boat seemed like it was moving, because we actually hadn't re-anchored yet at the reef. We were just about 5 kilometers off the actual reef's edge, so we hadn't grabbed yet onto new structure, because we still had the anchor on the bottom. That the anchor was just hanging the whole time.
Wow.
While we drifted. So, and honestly, luckily for us, I think that actually created more drag. We didn't drift as fast, because we could have doubled that probably over the night and gone 60 kilometers if we didn't have the anchor sort of like weighing the boat down a bit.
Oh, that's hilarious, mate. Yeah, you would have had a shock when you woke up and read that sound and realised how far away you were from where you were supposed to be.
Yeah. So I always definitely recommend rechecking your anchor. Like we actually did check it quite well that night. It was just I didn't account for the fact that we were going to have a 360 swing of the wind, so it just pulled us right out the other way and off the edge of the reef.
Yeah, well, you obviously didn't feel it at the time, like overnight.
Didn't feel it. Yeah, we didn't feel it at the time. It was pretty flat, so that was the other weird thing. Is I think what must have happened is because it was such a glass off, the line would have gone slack because of how still it was. And when it went slack, we probably unhooked from, like, just sort of came out of the sand and we would have just drifted right off.
Yeah, wow.
So.
Well, it was a good lesson learned there, right?
Yeah, 100%. We haven't done that since. And that same trip, actually, we didn't have enough petrol. Well, we did end up getting home, but I didn't account for us being an extra, 60 kilometers or 30 kilometers of me driving back to where we were. So when we got back to the boat ramp, we actually had like 3.7 liters of fuel left in the tank.
Wow.
So that was a pretty scary drive back. I only punched the whole way pretty slow.
Yeah. What size tank you got on that thing?
170 liter.
Yeah. Okay.
So around 90 kilometers offshore is what I can do confidently with that.
Yeah.
And that's for 2 days diving.
Do you take spare fuel, mate? Will you take a jerry
around.
or you don't?
Yeah, I always bring one extra jerry, and when we do shelf trips, I bring 3 extra jerries. Yeah.
Smart move. Mate, let's talk about
that trip as well. I was more aware of what to bring. So.
Oh, well, you learn through your mistakes, don't you? If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn, do you?
Yeah, that's it.
Some of the most valuable lessons I think I might have learnt from fucking some shit up, mate. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Mate, obviously the filming side of your spearing is a big thing for you. The footage that you're getting is unbelievable, and your editing side of things. You want to talk quickly about that, mate? You're running with the GoPros. Have you got a DSLR that you're using underwater with a housing on or something to get some of that footage, or is it all off your GoPro?
So it's all off the GoPro. I have looked at getting upgrading to one of those DSLRs, but I think for the moment, the GoPros are as good. They're pretty good. They can pretty much get just as good quality videos. You don't get as much, I guess, cinematic type of footage, but in terms of quality, it's very similar. So I've been running GoPro 8 is actually my preferred GoPro to use for underwater footage. It actually gets the most crisp quality out of all of them. The 9, 10, and 11 have, I don't know, they've got a bit of, they just look a bit more grainy compared to the 8. So I've just stuck with the 8 for myself, and then using the Mavic Mini, not the Mavic, sorry, the Mini 3 Pro for my drone.
Oh yeah, the DJI one, I think that is that right?
Yeah, the DJI one.
Yeah. Mate, yeah. And what about your editing side of things? Do you enjoy editing, mate? Like, it obviously, for people that don't realise, it's pretty time consuming and it's not for everyone. Do you do your editing, or are you getting someone else to do it, or?
No, so I do all of it. So that's another thing that got me into doing these whole videos of us spearfishing and stuff online is when I used to live in Bali, everyone there just loved doing social media stuff. So I was really keen on editing, and I used to do like just surfing edits and stuff. And then as soon as I moved here, I wanted to continue doing it. So spearfishing was just the next sort of option for me to do it. And so I kept doing it. And now I think I've improved over the years versus when I first started making videos. I actually watched one of my first ones the other day and I sort of laughed at it. I was like, oh God, this is a bit cringe. But it's good to see how you sort of progress over time.
Oh, that's right. You got to start somewhere,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like that first video was pretty daunting for me to post because, doing the whole vlogging, talking to the camera felt really awkward. But as soon as you post the first one, I feel like you don't care after that. You just got to keep going and just realize that most people are probably not even really picking up what you think looks bad. And it does take a lot of time. I probably put 10 to 20 hours into editing each video realistically. Well, maybe not so much 20 hours, but 10 hours is definitely how much I'd put into like a long, well-edited video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like recording a podcast, mate. A little bit daunting at first, but as the more people I talk to, the easier it becomes, sort of thing. And it's sharing that, talking about a common goal that we love. So it's not so bad after all.
Yeah, that's it,
mate. A little bit of parting wisdom. If you had your time again and you had to start out, would there be anything you did differently? Or what's a big piece of advice for someone that's starting out in the sport? You got some advice for
them? So I guess just in terms of like where you get into diving first, if you're got to do it land-based, then it's definitely a little bit difficult than being able to get out on the boat and go to the reef. But just sort of practicing safety, I guess, because one thing that we did at the start as well is we weren't really all that safe in our diving. I had a few instances where like a bull shark nearly would have just bitten me in half. And so I think always diving with the dive buddy, just being safer in terms of what you do, and in terms of covering ground to find your fish. I think a lot of people love to just dive an entire edge of a reef and look for fish. That's probably not the most efficient way to do your diving. So I do the bommy hopping stuff. And that's more advice for if you want to shoot, better fish like red emperor and that.
Yeah.
But as well, just having the right equipment. I wouldn't if you're going to get into it and continue doing it, definitely pick up on a half decent gun like a Rob Allen. Starting off with one of those ocean hunters can sort of set you back a bit because you're not really getting your full potential of what you could be shooting when you're diving in the range you get. And they always break after like a year or two. So at least with those other guns, they last, upwards of 10, 20 years if you treat them properly.
Yeah, nice work, mate. We mentioned quickly there off air, you were thinking about maybe starting a little brand up, mate. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's still all in the works at the moment, but will be hopefully coming soon. There's not really much to say about it because I'm sort of trying to keep it a semi-secret. Like I'll definitely try to get everyone keen soon on my socials that it's coming soon. But just a bit of merch and probably try to do a few little spearfishing things as well, like your throw flasher, and that might try to make like your most ideal centralized one that can be used in most situations. Because I have noticed that definitely the difference in the kinds of throw flashes that you use, like some reflections some reflective stuff that you put on them doesn't work as good as others, and so there's definitely different colors that fish pick out a bit better.
Nice, mate. Cool, buddy. So onto the socials. So where can people find you, mate? On your Instagram and obviously with your YouTube stuff. Run us through that.
So if you just type in my name, it's Zachary Schmidt. You can pretty much find me on Facebook, YouTube, and that stuff, just with that. And on Instagram, it's Zachary.Schmidt, and then with 2 T's at the end. So at the moment, I do a bit of TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube are my main 3 platforms. And I think on TikTok, it's probably the exact same as Instagram. I think it's Zachary.Schmidt, but with just 1 T, not 2 G's.
Nice, mate.
And so TikTok's been where I've taken off the most. And that's been really helpful for getting my footage out there.
Mate, that's awesome, buddy. And for people that probably haven't checked that out yet, I strongly advise you to jump on the YouTube channel or your Instagram page there, mate, because obviously the quality of fish that you guys are getting, your editing is looking fantastic. And the underwater footage and stuff that you're capturing. I've spoken to a heap of Spiro mates and that, and as I said, I was excited to get you on and chat about it because, mate, yeah, I reckon it's some of the best underwater footage getting around. So, yeah, it's a credit to you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. It's definitely something I sort of strive to do, just improve on the quality of footage that we get. And that definitely ties in with the whole DSLR camera stuff. I am looking at in the future getting that because I think there's potential to, take it to the next level with a camera like that, make the footage even more crisp and more of like storytelling sort of component to it too.
Yeah, nice work, buddy. Well, mate, that's about a wrap for us for today, buddy. Once again, like a massive thanks to you for coming on. You probably didn't even know who I was when I reached out to you. You were pretty keen straight away to jump on, and yeah, I just can't thank you enough for coming on. And I think, mate, there was a lot of good little points in that podcast there, and some knowledge from your experience that I'm sure people will be able to take away, especially with the red stuff and a little bit of that blue water stuff, mate. So yeah, I can't thank you enough, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you a lot as well for inviting me out today. Super keen on getting into more of this sort of stuff, and I think you've just given me like the first opportunity to do a podcast, and it was great fun.
What a great yarn that was with Zach. Some great takeaway points in relation to the reds and the throw flashes, and also the old rock above the head technique. I've got to be sure to try that one next time we're out diving. Jump onto his socials, on his YouTube and Instagram account. Check him out. As I said before, some of the best outdoor and underwater footage that you're ever going to see. So it's a great effort from him to keep producing those goods. Righto, on to the next week. This is a big one. Ben Jones, the GT Buster. He's coming on. It's going to be big, and he's talking all things top order. Super pumped for it, and can't wait to have that chat with him. If you like the show, do us a massive solid. Share it with your mates and subscribe to the podcast. It makes a big difference in getting our show's footprint out there so people can hear it. If you know someone you think would be good to have on, or you want to hear more about a specific topic, hit us up on our Instagram page. It's at stalkoutdoors.podcast. I'll make contact with you and see if we can make it happen. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, enjoy whatever adventure you got planned, and be safe out there.